qualifying section. There's no way that this would have been pre-cleared by Department of Justice to go from 200 voting sites to 60 voting sites. And at the same time, let's not forget, we also went to voting centers, which put another step in the verification process. So that's another procedural issue. When you've got poll workers now have to use some sort of online database to determine that the person hasn't voted yet, which is necessary when you use voting centers. Those two changes in the same election, when the justification is to save money, would have never been cleared by the Department of Justice as a legitimate change to voting process. So when that happens, we are forced to consider whether or not this requires us to take legal action under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which says that if you have a change in process that results in voters being disenfranchised, in voters having their voting rights infringed upon, then you have a cause of action under the Voting Rights Act. So we're investigating that now. We're trying to see what happened. Again, I want to emphasize it's not just shrinking down to 60 sites. It's when you do these voting centers, you have this new process when you have to use the e-poll books. And we've had reports that there were problems with the e-poll books, that not only did they cause extra delay, but that the e-poll books also at times malfunctioned and didn't give the right ballot that the person should have to take. I also want to point out that a 5-hour delay causes you to consider whether there's ADA concerns and whether disabled persons are having their voting rights impinged, because obviously a person who's otherly abled is not going to be able to stand in line for 5 hours to wait for a ballot. These are big global concerns. Also, we're going to be directing voters to fill out HAVA complaints. That's the Help America Vote Act. Those are complaints that be submitted to the Secretary of State for individual cases of where individuals saw things happen, like, for example, someone came to the voting line, it was 4 minutes to 7 and they were turned away. Those sorts of individual things, which are not a broad procedural violation, but an individual had that person's rights taken away. So all these things are going to require further investigation, but it really seems like this is the kind of behavior that merits legal action, and we are certainly going to look hard at determining whether we have a good case and whether it's necessary. Because as you heard Supervisor Gallardo say, we've got an election coming up on May 17th, and in that election they intend to use voting sites again. And we have to make sure that when our education, our children's education is being voted on, that it's done right. And sometimes I'm sorry is not good enough, and if that's the case, we will have to look forward to taking legal action.
Are there any questions for any of us?
How many people have reached out to you guys through your website or your phone line who have had problems, and were most of them just were the wait, or do you think there's a computer glitch in their system?
We sent out an email yesterday asking people to tell us their voting problems. About 3,500 people so far have submitted the form, and we had over 1,000 calls on Election Day, all with people who were having issues. Most of the issues were the lines. Some of the issues were there was no parking for miles and miles. So they had to actually be turned away by police at voting sites. And the most catastrophic issues were when people had to leave the lines because they were elderly, or you can feel how hot it is today. It was this hot on Election Day for an elderly person who's just walked a mile from her parking spot. That's really hard for her to wait in a 5-hour line.
Do you think that is reflected in the turnout? They were expecting 60-65% turnout, and it's going to come in way under that. Do you think that just drove you people?
We were actually really impressed with the turnout on the Democratic side and the Republican side combined, considering the catastrophic issues that we saw. But it's very clear from looking at those lines, especially looking at how the lines extended till midnight, that turnout was definitely affected. There's no way it wasn't.
We have no idea how many voters have actually walked away or could not wait in line. I was at the polling place around 10:30 at the 7th Avenue and Glendale polling place. There was a group of employees that work in a nursing home just right across the street that had to go to work at 11 o'clock. Their shift started at 11 o'clock. They waited almost 3.5 hours. They couldn't wait no more. They had to just leave and go to work. So we have no idea exactly how many voters actually were disenfranchised in terms of could not wait no more, or maybe could not stand in the line as long as some of the other voters We have no idea, but we do encourage people to call in with your complaints. We need to know who they are, and we need to know what polling places they were standing at. All that information needs to be collected and analyzed.
Republicans included too.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Yes,
And
definitely.
Republicans and independents included also.
Secretary Reagan has called for a series of public hearings, and she's going to conduct them in the worst hit areas. Are you encouraged by that?
Yeah.
It's being billed as a transparent sort of thing and open to everybody, Democratic and Republican. Are you encouraged by that? And do you think we can shed some light on what happened?
I'm definitely encouraged that some light is now being shed on these terrible problems that have been issues in Arizona for many years. I'm glad that they're starting a dialogue, and I just hope that that dialogue actually comes to some action items where we're not seeing these kind of problems in November.
I just happened to overhear that actually, I mean, this was, all across the county. I've heard anecdotally, and it's just something I overheard. But I heard that Paradise Valley was also affected too.
Yeah, this is. I mean, look,
Yeah.
this when this kind of shrinkage occurs, it affects a lot of people, but it's going to disproportionately affect poor people and people of color in terms of being able to drive somewhere, being able to have the time to actually sit there and actually wait for it, wait for the opportunity to vote. And just the areas that are most likely to not be voting by mail, because there's a rich tradition of voting in person, are going to end up being disproportionately of color or poor. However, it does not mean that voter suppression did not occur among Republicans, among the well-off. They too were inconvenienced, and there's no denying that. To your Reagan point, to Secretary Reagan's point, if she was serious about this, she would move even faster. The legislature is about to close up. It's going to be very difficult to get bills passed and signed by the governor, especially because she's going to have to put an emergency clause on it. Instead, what she did this year was spend the time early in the year trying to gut civic organizations being able to help people fill out their ballots, making it harder to vote by mail, as well as making it more difficult and to keep large money, dark money out of politics. So if she's serious about it, we'd like to see her move with more urgency.
And Barbara, real quickly, Barbara, on the May 17th election, because that's what has to be looked at. We need real reform in the state of Arizona when it comes to our election procedures. We need to start talking about May 17th. Is Maricopa County Elections Department prepared for May 17th? We know there has to be additional polling places. Are they ready to go out and have 800 polling places? Are they prepared with 7,000 board workers? Do we need to perhaps extend or postpone the May 17th election for a couple of weeks? Do we need to extend the hours? All that can be done by the legislature and the governor to make sure that May 17th, Prop 123, the education proposition is passed, or not passed, but allow all voters to be able to participate in that particular election. Otherwise, you're going to have disenfranchised voters. If you disenfranchise one voter, that's one voter too many. So we need to have that discussion while the legislature is still in session, where things can be done. We need to perhaps expand the voting hours to much larger than just 7 o'clock, allow more people to actually vote. And we need to start talking about, can we have 800 polling places in Maricopa County? That's a discussion that Maricopa County Elections needs to come to decide. And the legislature needs to decide, how are we going to fix the May 17th election to make sure that we do not have a repeat of what we had on Tuesday.
The question on this side.
I'm sorry.
Wait, all right. Who's taking charge here? Hold on. I'm gonna get to you, Rebecca. You had your hand up first.
Okay, my question's for Jim. I was wondering if there, in the potential lawsuits you're talking about, if you could just give us a sense what kind of relief you would be seeking, and how that works. And then the second question I had was, early in the day on Tuesday, we were hearing reports about Democrats who were being told they were independents, and I was just wondering if that was sort of borne out as a bigger trend, or if those were kind of one-offs, or if they ended up not being done.
Right. So first off, the type of relief would most likely be some sort of injunctive relief to change the system going forward. I will say there is a provision in the Voting Rights Act, if you can show that there's disregard for voting rights, that you can actually be forced back into preclearance, even if even if the Section 4 was unconstitutional. So I think the short answer is probably injunctive relief that would require a judge to take charge of the system, and so that the county elections would have to demonstrate that they had protected the rights of voters. As for your question about registration, there were many voters who believed that they were registered either Republican or Democrat that came to the polls and discovered that they were not shown as being registered with a party. That's a very fact-intense question, okay? And we're still trying to sort of pull that apart. You'll recall we've mentioned the 2012 election a couple of times. The 2012 elections, we had a problem with too many people being on Pebble or people being on Pebble and they didn't know it. It turned out the problem was the MVD. It was just very easy to check a box and get on Pebble and kind of not realize that's what's happening, and that's what caused a lot of those provisional ballots in 2012. We wonder if there's a similar issue here with the MVD process, and if it's easier for me to leave my party preference blank than I think. We also know there's been some recent changes to the Service Arizona website, but before that, again, I believe if you went on to change your address, it was easier to sort of end up with a no party preference than you might expect. So we have to check that out. We also have to look and see if there were mistakes. We got to see how paper forms were processed. That particular question, like I said, is a real fact-intensive one we're going to have to dive into.
Rebecca?
Yeah, a few questions. Supervisor Gallardo, you talked about warning Helen Purcell that these changes would create long lines and problems. However, you voted in favor of the plan. Why did you do that?
Okay, good question. And I do take fault of this. I should have called for a roll call vote. I didn't. I should have been more forceful in my opposition looking back. At the end of the day, I informed Helen Purcell and Karen Osborne we needed additional polling places. They told me no. I informed the Democratic Party. I informed local media. I talked about it on a local radio station that we did not have enough polling places. Now, should I have called for a roll call vote? Looking back, yes. I would have called for a roll call vote. This way you wouldn't ask that question. But the fact...
Why did you vote no?
What's that?
Why did you vote no if you thought it was...
It wasn't a roll call vote, I guess. I should have called for a roll call vote where everyone has the chance to vote. Otherwise, it just kind of goes through the process. I should have called for a roll call vote where, Mr. Supervisor in District 4, how do you vote? That sort of stuff. I would have voted no. I talked about it at our board meeting. I talked about it beforehand. My chief of staff was the first one to be notified, probably early February, with this plan. She voiced her opposition in the chiefs of staff's meeting. I spoke with Karen and Helen a number of times about this. We made it clear we did not have enough polling place. We were fearful that this would happen.
Sorry, I was just pulling something off your back.
Sorry.
But just to back, and I've known Steve now for too many years, but he certainly has had dedication to making sure that we have as much access to the ballot as possible. So without a doubt, and kind of hearing what was occurring, without doubt, he has been advocating prior to the issues coming up for more ballot access. However, the problem you have here, though, is a culture at the Maricopa County Recorder's Office that has consistently been hesitant to change and more open access for voters. Whether it's allowing civic groups to get more involved in the education and help people collect and put their ballots in the mail, or going and advocating for other voter suppression laws at the State House.
If this has been a culture for years that Democrats have been concerned about, why haven't you put up a challenger to her in previous elections?
Well, there was one a couple years ago, but part of the problem is even if you have a challenger is that you still have a Republican legislature that is committed to disenfranchising voters. So this is a multi-layer problem. We do have a challenger this year. We're very excited about Adrian Fontes, who will assure that all voters, whether you're Democrat, Republican, or Independent, you're going to have your vote counted. But it's not just obviously the culture there, but it truly is a problem with the Secretary of State's office as well as the legislature pushing a lot of these laws. Next question. Melissa.
This year, one of the issues that has come up is whether or not the parties should have to pay for their own primary presidential elections. Does this kind of play into the hands of like, well, if we did such a bad job, you take it on?
Yeah, I think, You look at so many other states, and setting up the election is a responsibility of the state. It's a responsibility of the government. Not all government net spending is always bad. And in this case, it really disenfranchised a lot of people when they made budget cuts that were really unnecessary and really hurt people.
There's a clear perception among a group of people, if you look at social media, who are Bernie Sanders supporters and feel like, for one reason or another, this was an effort by the establishment, Democrats and Republicans, to keep them out. Can you both of you say today you're sure that's not the case, and why?
Sure.
Steve, take it, and then I'll piggyback.
I am a surrogate, and I am a strong supporter of Senator Sanders for president. I've spoken on his behalf. I've attended all the rallies. I can tell you, seeing this whole process unfold, that was not the case. I can tell you, it wasn't Bernie Sanders supporters that were disenfranchised. All of Arizona was disenfranchised. It doesn't matter where you come from or where you live. This was a poorly designed election, and it wasn't just this election. And as was stated before, this was a combination of stuff. I mean, we have just reaffirmed why Arizona needs federal oversight in the state of Arizona. This reaffirms why Department of Justice pre-clearance is so important. The Supreme Court's decision to violate the Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act was a bad decision. I think you do see a lot of Section 2 complaints coming out of this. I have a conference call at 1 o'clock with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights in Washington, D.C., who is analyzing this. How far did voters have to travel, particularly minority voters, for the most part, to have less likely have transportation means? We're looking at it. We're going to unpeel this onion to see how bad it is. And if there are Section 2 violations, I can rest assured they will be filed in court.
But don't comments by the Sanders campaign manager, Jeff Weaver, that they don't trust the vote count here, just because that fans the flames of Bernie supporters that think that this was rigged?
Listen, so speaking from the party, if I'm part of the establishment, I was running around all day giving water to voters, taking voters' calls, trying to help people vote. I want all Democrats and all people in Arizona to have the right to exercise their right to vote. So I was working tirelessly along with our entire staff to make sure that we could help in any way we could under these terrible circumstances.
Trying to get the polls open later.
Next question.
So looking past May, obviously these polling stations are a complete disaster, but what about something like some other states like Washington State have done where it's a mail-in ballot where you get to avoid that altogether? Are you guys even looking at something like that?
That's always an option. I can tell you tomorrow morning I have a meeting with Karen Osborne and Helen Purcell tomorrow morning to talk about May 17th. I want to see their plan. I want to see how they plan on Tuesday was a disaster. Throw that plan away. That's not good. The county elections office has 2 months, less than 2 months, to come up with a plan that will allow voters an opportunity to cast their ballot. Freely, easy, accessible. We need a plan. I'm going to meet with them tomorrow. We'll have a better idea. I'm looking forward to see what their suggestions are, because Tuesday's election, garbage, throw it away. It's not happening. If the legislature wants to look at other options, that's fine. Right now, the county recorders don't have that option under state law, but I really think the legislature needs to start looking at May 17th. What are the options? Let's expand the hours of polling places. Let's do what we can to make sure that May 17th is not going to disenfranchise one voter.
Now, do you think that they actually would have the opportunity to open more polling stations in the next couple of months?
She could.
Is that a far-fetched idea?
That there's a lot of options that she could be using, and not just her, but even other places across the state. In terms of universal ballot, like I believe Oregon, Washington has, that's always an option. The goal should be to allow more people to vote in a manner that we can all agree is accountable in the easiest way possible. That has not been the dogma of the Republican Party here in Arizona. This is what you see as a result of two things: austerity politics, where we try to do more government services on the cheap, and voter suppression efforts. And this is what happens when you do that, and this is the resultant of that.
Here's my question. And this is the question you take to Governor Ducey, who put out a statement just that following morning in regards to this election. Here's my question. Governor Ducey, did you know about the 60 polling place plan? I can tell you he probably did. I can tell you that. And here's my other question to Governor Ducey. What are you going to do as governor to ensure that your Proposition 123 is not going to disenfranchise voters? The fact is the legislature is still in play. They're still right now they're at the legislature voting on pieces of legislation. It's controlled by Republicans in both the House and the Senate. The governor's office definitely has input. Let's come out with a bill real quickly. You can, if it's a fair bill, you will get bipartisan support. That's going to fix the May 17th election to make sure this does not happen. But I repeat, go ask the governor, were you aware that they were going to use the 60 polling place plan for the May 17th election? Ask them that question, because that was the plan. I can tell you the plan is to use the 60 polling places for the May 17th election. Ask him if he knew about that and what he thinks about it. I've read his statement. Now, what is he going to do about it? The fact is, Tuesday's election was a disaster. We need real reform in the state of Arizona. We need to get rid of this 29-day cutoff date. That's ridiculous. We need same-day voter registration. We need to make sure everyone has an opportunity to exercise the most fundamental right they have, their right to vote.
And Jim,
It's a little low energy today, aren't you?
meeting that you all had with the County Elections Office yesterday, bringing up the registration problems. We understand that you brought names of voters, they looked at the rolls, and they were in fact registered as independent. So, you know, it wasn't like there was
Well, first off, it wasn't that everyone was registered as an independent. Some people were registered as no party preference. So the first thing is it was a relatively small sample, okay? And the reason why I make the distinction between no party preference and between independent is that independent means I register as an independent. No party preference can mean that I just don't fill in the box. All right, so this is when I was talking before about needing to drill down into that, is we need to figure out why are there so many people. You know, there's a news story every year about all Arizonans are fleeing the parties and they're all registering as independents. But now we have this example on Tuesday where we saw thousands and thousands of people who didn't know that they had fled the parties and didn't know they'd become independents. So I think what I was saying was we need to investigate the source of that, and we need to see if this is a situation where something needs to be done at MVD, maybe something, if I fill out the form and I put my address in, I just want to change my address, right? Maybe I assume that all that does is change the address. Does that also, if I don't fill in the party preference, does that change that as well? So I think we just have a lot more data to gather on that.
Did you get answers from the office yesterday, and did you come away satisfied, or what did you hear in that meeting?
Well, we got answers about whether or not there was anyone who was registered as a Democrat that was turned away, and we don't have an example of that. That's not to say there isn't one, but that we don't have an example of that. We also got answers about the answers were more on what's on the form. Okay, so we did get answers on what's on the form itself. What we need to investigate still, and what we don't have all the answers on, is how did that information get on the form? Yeah.
Wait, are you sure about the statement? You said thousands and thousands of people were believing they were registered in a party, and when they arrived, they were told they were independents. Does the party support that it's thousands?
P&D.
Well,
Independents,
from the
P&D.
Democratic Party? I've heard some anecdotals, but what's your number?
There's a lot. That's the long and short of it. We're still going through all of the data, but we should have an answer in the next couple of days.
There's thousands
but
of
we know
provisional ballots.
We know it's at least that.
There's thousands of provisional ballots,
People
and most
who
of those were.
thought they were in one party.
Yes.
And were told they were independent.
Yeah.
And not independent. We got to get some language down. No party preference. Independent, you actually are writing down that you are an independent. No party preference means you didn't put anything down.
Right.
The reason I know this is because when I first moved to Arizona as a lifelong Democrat, when I went and signed up the DMV, I checkmarked and wrote in Democrat. The DMV forms does not have a box. It has a write-in. You have to write in your party. And though I was a lifelong Democrat, when I got my voter registration card, it came back as P&D. And I immediately looked that up and realized that they had put me down as a party undesignated. And I went back online and changed it. There are people that do this because they are educated enough on politics that they file it. There are other people that, well, I'm registered, P&D must mean something democratic, and therefore they stay to it. So this is occurring. It occurred to me personally 12 years ago when I moved here, and I know it's occurring to other people who register. They believe they're Democrats. They get their ballots. They get excited finally about a primary. Maybe they haven't voted in other primaries, so they assume, even though they voted all the times, all these generals for all these Democrats, they went down the one time for a primary, and that's when they were told to do it. So there's clearly a problem with the forms, and something that we've been talking about for a while now, and hopefully they will listen to us and actually do some changes on that too.
Yep.
About people with the provisional ballots, what should they be doing? I mean, some of them are address issues, right? Like they needed a different form of ID.
Right.
What can you say about, like, to make sure your provisional gets counted?
Definitely. Jim, you want to?
Sure, you can go onto the Maricopa County election site and you can put in information. You can find out whether your ballot was counted or not. So that's a good thing that we have in Arizona, is you can follow up with that and make sure whether your provisional ballot was counted or not. And if it wasn't counted, then you can look into why it wasn't counted and figure out how you can remedy it.
But you mentioned.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you mentioned people having the wrong form of ID. That's another huge issue that we need to address. These voter ID laws in Arizona are terribly restrictive, and they're going to really hurt both parties on Election Day in November if it isn't rectified.
And it is upon Maricopa County, the Elections Department, and then this is every county, all 15 counties, to notify those voters that have voted a provisional ballot and let the voters know if their ballot, for whatever reason, if it was not counted, but why. The voters need to know. If it's an address change or if it's a wrong party affiliation, they need to know that, hey, for whatever reason, you're registered PND, but you need to re-register. Those are the things that I think the county recorder's responsibility is to notify those voters to let them know. I would venture out to say that most of the provisional ballots are exactly that. They were independents and party not designated. They thought they were able to participate. They thought they were registered Republicans and Democrats, and they weren't. So we need to address that, and I think it's upon the county recorder to notify them and let them know.
Sheila, is the state Democratic Party calling for any resignations out of this, or what do you want to see from Secretary Reagan and herself going forward here?
I want to see a secretary and a recorder that do their jobs. I want to see some major changes for November. We cannot have this. Tuesday was absolutely unacceptable. I absolutely condemn the plan, and I think that we either need to call on them to do their jobs, do them better, or we need new people in office who can do them for them.
So not resignation.
That's up to the voters to decide.
Yeah, that's how I feel. It's up to the voters to decide, but we need voters to be able to come out in November to vote in a new Secretary of State, a new county recorder. We need new change at the Ducey administration's level and at the legislative level.
If they can't vote, they can't decide. We
Yep.
need everyone to be able to vote.
Okay, let's